If any of you ever go into teaching, it's designed for high school teachers, but there's a book called Teach Like a Champion by Doug Lemov, a very famous American educator, which is a wonderful book that looks literally at the logistics of teaching. Now, how to get a class, which obviously isn't relevant here, to settle down, how to distribute notes, etc., in every chapter. And at the end of some of them, it says, this will save you 90 seconds a lesson, and over the course of the year, that's equivalent to 4 extra lessons, and we know the effect of 4 extra lessons is XXX grade points. And if you ever, whatever line of work you go into, you will find it helps to be a completely anal bastard. Because there are always aspects of any job that you do where thinking through the actual logistics will pay you dividends. So whether or not you're an economist, you're interested in the economic future, remember one day in your life when you think in a really anal manner about something to do, some way to do something, or when you appreciate a colleague who has, look back on this lecture and think, yes, I remember a balding middle-aged man telling me about the benefits of being anal. And then it will have been worth coming, right? Usually that sort of skit is done by the warm-up man and then the main lecturer comes on. But hey, this is a free event. We can't afford to pay for a warm-up person.
Yeah, we're just going to wait a couple more minutes and then we'll get started.
Sorry, that's just me teasing the photographer at the back. He set himself a challenge of taking a better picture than that one that was taken by one of his rivals recently. I like this picture because when you're middle-aged, and men, I warn you of this, this is not so true for women, there's a fair chance you will be balding. And then you'll find that a picture that's 2 or 3 years out of date, you show that in an event, and you really have lost some hair, haven't you? So it's really quite important if you're a balding middle-aged man to always use an up-to-date photo. Indeed, when I recently went to get my security pass about a year ago, redone for the House of Commons, the guy looked at me and said, yeah, you haven't lost much hair this year. You can keep the same photo. Which was a little kinder than the person at the LSE who, when I came to renew my photo, said, oh no, you need a new one. And I knew exactly what he meant. He was a rather smug young man with a very full head of hair. There we are. Old age is very bad, but it's better than the only alternative. That's an A.J.P. Taylor remark for those of you historians.
Right, how about we get started and then say, if more people are coming in, the most important thing is that they hear Professor Tim Leunig, not me. So just to say, welcome back to the Sheikh Zayed Theatre. We can't have a conference at the LSE without having an economist addressing students here coming from all over the country and internationally. So maybe before I hand over to Tim, who's going to do a far better job at introducing himself than I am, let's just have a sort of show of hands. Who here is in the social sciences? Put up your hands.
Yay!
Yay, hooray. Who here is in the arts and humanities? Put up your hands. Hooray, oh.
Oh, and hardcore scientists?
Hardcore scientists, there you go.
Natural scientists, easy science, as Mark Walport used to call it. And he was the government chief scientific advisor. He once told me that getting a rocket, he said, being a rocket scientist is easy. You fill a canister with fuel, you pierce a hole and you set fire to it. It will go in the opposite direction to the hole. Whereas social science is much harder. So if we take this convenient piece of paper, which I shall screw up not because I disapprove of the message, if you're a natural scientist, what happens when I drop it?
Gravity.
Gravity. If you're a social science, what happens when I drop it? You don't know because, oops, I missed it, sorry. It wasn't as big. You see, even I didn't. Oh no! As I say, in social science, you have no idea what will happen. Because believe me, even if I tried, I couldn't manage that again, which is a relief. Right, we've got the audience. Let's get on with it.
So
sorry.
We're going to... I think no further introduction is necessary.
No further
Over to you, Tim. I'm
there
speechless.
We are. I'm afraid the rest of the lecture is either uphill or downhill all the way. I am an economist to the core and from the core. I took up the discipline of economics age 14 when I read John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath. I recommend it to all of you, and I thought life would be better if people knew a bit more economics. Then they could vote better. They wouldn't vote for idiots, I thought. So I thought I shall learn some economics, and I read that book. And I read A.J.P. Taylor's Origins of the Second World War, and I also took up history. I planned to do neither subject at the age of 14, and I fell in love with both of them. I then became an economic historian. I've taught at the LSE for 25 years. I've taught in other places. I now work half-time in a think tank and half-time for a consultancy, and I spent the last 12 years in government. I was the inventor of the furlough scheme during COVID when I was Rishi Sunak's economic advisor. That was the most useful morning of my life. He texted me at 9:26. By 12:30, I had devised the furlough scheme, persuaded special advisors, persuaded senior colleagues, and the Chancellor agreed that if HMRC could do it, he would enact it. There was a sense in which my professional life is over. I will never get to do anything as exciting, and I hope for your sake I never get to spend £76 billion of your money. To be fair, we have recovered about 55 billion so far through taxes and other things, but you know, it wasn't a cheap thing to do, and I am full of praise for the Prime Minister. Whether or not you vote for him or not is a separate issue, but he had the guts to do something that radical on the advice of one person having thought about it. And I'm full of admiration for HMRC for their ability to deliver it. Right. Okay, this worked 2 minutes ago. He's one of my former students. He knows stuff that I don't know.
Turn it on.
Anyway, I think since I've now seen the next slide, I shall just get out the paper notes in case it fails. Perfect. But I shall be...
Bring it to the next slide.
Oh, sorry, that one? Yay.
You're in the
Sorry. The phrase, right. That one, was very poor on my part. So these are 4 big economic challenges I want to talk to you about today, and they get harder or more interesting as we go on. So the first one is AI. This is the best book on AI. It's not particularly new. You can have the slides afterwards. You can Google it. You can look it up. You can read the whole thing. It's about that thick. I have read it. It's by serious people. Or you can read the sort of puff pieces you get in Forbes magazine or something in which someone who works for McKinsey tells you that everything is different. Because it really isn't. This is Philippe Aghion. Philippe still has a good shot at the Nobel Prize. I think he was the best lecturer when I was a graduate student. He is the most French person you'll ever meet. And what he says at the end is that AI is just another technology. We've had new technologies for centuries. And therefore, who do you want to ask? You want to ask economic historians, because the historical experience of technological change will help us understand AI. And what does that tell us? Well, Betsy Stevenson, who from memory worked for the Obama campaign, says, look, lots and lots of people are fearful about what AI means. And for some individuals, it will change their lives in a bad way. But for most of us, it just means we'll be richer, because that's what technology does. Technology makes things that were hard in the past easy. And when things become easy, they become cheap. When my students tell me, oh, this is hard, I say, you should be pleased. If it was easy, you'd only earn minimum wage. So next time you think your studies are hard, rejoice. Because if they're hard for you, they're even harder for other people, because you're really smart. And the fact that they're harder for other people means only a handful of people can do it. And therefore, those handful of people end up well paid. But AI is no different to any other change. Jim Besson, a great researcher on the history of technology, who I remember talking to when I was a PhD student. He made a lot of money. He quit the rat race when he was 40 and became an academic. Those people are the hardest to teach, but the most rewarding. And here is his data on the number of people in the US who work in manufacturing. And you can see it's gone down by 2/3, from about 22% to 7%. That's a heck of a revolution. The US has lost 2/3 of its manufacturing jobs, and the world has not ended. So even if AI gets rid of 2/3 of the jobs in a huge, great sector like manufacturing, it is not the end of the world. In fact, it is entirely compatible with a massive rise in living standards, because between the end of the Second World War and now, the US economy has grown like never before. Technological change is powerful. Textiles. I wrote my PhD on this. They collapsed. There are now more textile museums in the United Kingdom than textile factories. This was the biggest industry in Britain for 125 years. Any of you who come from Lancashire, from Preston or Blackburn or Burnley, will know the heritage of those towns, and you will know it is not the reality today. The same is true in the United States. We see the same in steel. Again, 450,000 jobs lost. Now, I am not denying that that's bad news for those communities, and if you want to understand it, read this book. This is a great book. She won the Pulitzer Prize for one of her earlier books. The only thing that's wrong with this book is the subtitle. This is not an American story. This is a story that happens everywhere. For the communities that are based around one industry, technological change is awful. She went and lived in Janesville in Wisconsin. It's in Paul Ryan's district, and she documented what happened when the General Motors plant shut down. That's why that's a Pontiac. It's not a random car, believe me. You don't buy anything except a GM car if you live in Janesville, not if you want to survive. It's a great book. I got her over to give a public lecture at LSE at some point. So, Betsy Stevenson sums it up in one of these wonderful American subtitles. If you're British and you read American newspapers, you'll discover they have amazingly long titles that are entire sentences where every word begins with a capital letter, except for some reason and. And here we've got productivity growth ultimately gives us better lives and more options. These slogans are also available to communist dictatorships that come up with slogans like that. So there's this odd thing between weird sort of undemocratic countries and American academics in the way they write their papers. But that is true. That's all you need to know about AI unless you go into the industry. So what does this mean? Well, it will destroy a bunch of jobs, and it will create a bunch of jobs. But it won't create jobs in AI. One of the great ironies at the moment is a chunk of people who are losing their jobs because of large language models are computer coders. Because it turns out that large language models can write computer code better and more quickly than computer coders. So this revolution really is eating its own people. So instead, what we've got is a wonderful historical paper by David Autor. For any of you who want to become academics, change your name now so that it becomes the first in the alphabet with your co-authors. Change your name to Aardvark if you wish to be successful. No one is ever going to remember Brian Siegmiller, but everyone knows this is one of David Autor's papers. And here are some of the new careers. Have any of you ever heard of being a smoke jumper? Are any of your parents smoke jumpers? Nope, I have no idea what a smoke jumper is, but this is from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics new jobs. And when they enter into, meaning there's enough people that this warrants a separate category in American statistics. So this person jumps into wildland fires by parachuting out of an aircraft into the fire in order to help put it out. Because apparently it's often better to fight the fire from the inside, because as the fire moves out, the inside is just about bearable. So he parachutes into the middle of a wildfire and attacks it from where it started, as well as conventionally from the other side. I mean, who knew, right? AI has not created this job, but what AI has done is made us all rich enough to be able to afford to employ smoke jumpers. That's the way the economy works. That's what technology does. The fact that your clothing costs 1/10 of the price it would have done 50 years ago allows you to purchase sandwiches rather than making them yourselves, or whatever it is. That's how the economy works. Technology makes things cheaper. You have money left over. We employ smoke jumpers. And here's what else we employ. These are new categories from the last 20 years. They've stopped collating these now, which is why these are all 10 years old. Golf ball divers are apparently people who dive into lakes on golf courses and rescue the golf balls. They get paid $2 a golf ball typically. And apparently some of these lakes have so many golf balls, you can make good money. They wear scuba diving equipment. They have really, really bright light so they can penetrate the gunk down there, and they find golf balls. Again, I'm not recommending this as a career, but this is what AI will deliver. More people to do things like this. Santa Claus, a friend of mine, is a professional Santa Claus. He is one of London's top Santa Clauses. If I got him on stage now and told you he was one of London's top Santa Claus, you look at him and think, yeah, I can believe that. And Santa Claus is now a really big business. I asked him how much he earns, and he wouldn't tell me. But I do know that last year, one of the Premiership football clubs employed him. They pay well. Not only do they pay well, and he wouldn't tell me where they helicoptered him to, but they helicoptered him out of London to this is even a London club. I have no idea why they helicoptered him out. But he actually landed as Santa Claus in a helicopter for some event or other. Because being a Santa Claus is now big business, particularly in the United States. Apparently you can make $50,000 in 3 months as a Santa Claus. Who knew? Why? Because we have more money, because we're richer, because of technology. So that's what you really, really need to understand about AI. There, we've got a shortage of them. If any of you know people of an older generation who look like Santa, now is the time to go into that industry. Right, net zero. This is challenge number 2. Net zero is real. Temperatures are getting worse. It really is. Well, I was going to say it's hot out there, but that's not quite true today. But the world is getting hotter, and yes, this is a problem. However, It's not my number one thing, which is why it's only 2 out of my 4. They get harder and harder. This is what Britain has already achieved. This is UK emissions over time. It's a very long time series. It goes back to 1850. Comes from Carbon Brief, a very good authoritative source. And what you can see is Britain has halved carbon emissions. We are the first country in the world to have achieved that. We should be proud of that. Now, of course, what we have done so far is to get rid of the low-hanging fruit. But still, if you look at the path between where we are in 2050 and you draw a nice straight line, it's not obvious that that's impossible, right? We just have to keep cutting carbon at the rate we have managed for the last 30 years. That doesn't seem undoable to me. I'm not saying that means we can relax and put our feet up. We can't. We did, as I said a moment ago, the lowest hanging fruit first. But at the same time as we picked those low-hanging fruit, we also now get to stand on the shoulders of giants, in Einstein's phrase. Because in the last 30 years, we've invented so much in the world of climate change, good stuff, e.g. solar panels are now very cheap, e.g. wind turbines are very cheap, e.g. we can now send electricity longer distances, we have electric cars, we can store electricity, that by standing on the shoulders of giants, we can reach the fruit that seemed out of reach 20 years ago. And we might not quite hit zero in 2050, we might hit it in 2045, or it might take till 2055, but we will be there or thereabouts unless we're really, really stupid. We can hit that for sure. Here is an example of why we're going to do it. I'm sorry to say that isn't tomorrow. I failed to remember to update that. That was a couple of weeks ago when I first gave this talk. Electricity is now free in Europe, in southern Europe for most of the day, because there is now so much solar power that we have a surf heat of electricity. By the way, that also means that air conditioning in Spain is now a guilt-free pleasure. You are doing no damage to the environment, and it costs you almost nothing to run your aircon. Why is Texas installing more solar power than anywhere else in the United States at the moment? Is it A, because Texans are the greenest people in the world? No. Or is it B, because the economics of solar are so strong in Texas, you'd have to be an idiot not to? The answer is obviously B. And that's what we're finding in so many places. It doesn't matter whether you want to go green. People are going to go green anyway, because for most people it's so cheap. It's literally costless to go green. It's not even costless, it's better than that. You can't get gas-fired electricity for zero in Spain. You can get solar. Can't do that in Britain with solar, but there's a company called X-Links. You can Google them afterwards. They want to build a very long cable from Devon to Morocco, build a very big solar panel in Morocco, ship the electricity to Britain. Again, that's a sensible plan. Singapore is currently doing the same to Australia. Theirs is a much harder plan. It's a much, much trickier bit of seabed, etc. But Singapore at the moment produces all of its electricity in a way that is not green, and they want to move from being 100% non-green to 100% green electricity. Their company is called Sun Cable. It's an Australian company. Here's where there's good solar power potential. It's not Northern Europe, but it is Southern Europe, it is North Africa, it is Australia, it is Texas and West. Altitude also matters. Altitude is really helpful for solar potential. The air is thinner, there's less stuff in the way. We are going to see some very long cables. It's only approximately twice as far from here to Texas as here to Morocco. I know it doesn't look like it on that map, that's because of the Mercator projection. So you heard it here first. I think within your lifetime, we will take electricity from Texas. Because in the evening in Britain, when we most need electricity, it's the middle of the day in Texas. It's a perfect pairing. We'll take it in winter, and in the summer, they'll take it for aircon. Because in winter, they don't need nearly as much electricity. In summer, we don't need as much electricity. So they'll keep their electricity in summer for aircon. We'll take it in winter for heating. What else can we do with low-cost solar? We can suck CO2 out the air. This is a company called Carbon Engineering. I met its founder. It's a wonderful company. You can Google it up. They're literally sucking CO2 out the air and making seashells out of it. Or they concentrate CO2 and they put it back in the ground where we used to store natural gas. The guy who founded that is now founding an even more interesting company called Captura. There's a lot of CO2 that's dissolved in the oceans. If you take the CO2 out of the ocean, it automatically takes it in from the atmosphere. So they're sucking it out of the ocean, knowing the ocean will then recertify it. And Joe Biden's senior scientists have certified that this is real and genuine. It's worth a Google. Various really big names are investing in this at the moment. And the guy who runs it and ran Carbon Engineering is one of those restless entrepreneurs. He has a PhD, it's in natural science, you'll be pleased to know. He's British, I wish he were in Britain, but he's doing good work. So, on to the third one. Women. The future. It's over, men. The history of the world is the emasculation of men, and generally the world is better for it. Most murderers are men. Most people who start wars are men. Most evil dictators are male. The rise of women is a thoroughly good thing for our standard of living. Here you've got the percentage of women who work on the y-axis against GDP on the x-axis, and there's no obvious relationship. But what you can see is at any level of income, there is a huge variety in the percentage of women who work. And this really is, for any country in the bottom half or two-thirds of this graph, the lowest hanging fruit in terms of raising the standard of living. Now, here we see some for specific countries, and you can see at the top, these are all developed countries. You can see Sweden at the top and Italy at the bottom. As a rough sort of back of the envelope, if Italy could match Sweden, the standard of living in Italy would rise by at least 20%. That's a big number. It's a big number. Allowing women, getting women, forcing women, you can decide how you view this, into work is the biggest, easiest way to raise GDP, unless you're already Sweden, in which case you've done it and you can't do it again. They've pretty much run out of women. I mean, they might be able to get it up by another 10%, but not much more than that, because you never get to 100%. You won't get it for either gender. So in the olden days, men worked and earned more than women because men are typically stronger than women. I realize when you look at me that that's not self-evident, but it is true on average. Indeed, the book of Leviticus tells us that a female slave is worth 3/5 of a male one. And that's a pretty accurate guide to pre-industrial productivity of men and women in agriculture because of differences in strength. But that's no longer the case. What matters now is human capital, it's education. Almost everyone now has some degree of education. You obviously have a lot more. And that means that the idea that men should earn more than women is now just bizarre. Here we've got the difference between men and women. And what you can see is that these are tending to 100%. Except that, look at the tertiary figures, these two at the bottom. What you've got there is women overtaking men, really quite dramatically. Women are now much more likely to stay on post-16, post-18, whatever the relevant ages are in your country. They're more likely to do master's degrees, and they are more likely to do better at them. Women are now more skilled in almost every academic discipline than men. Of course, there's still a handful of jobs for which men have advantages. Carrying bricks. Yeah, great. It's not the future. What we find, however, is that men still earn much more than women. I don't know if there are any women from South Korea here, but my firm advice is emigrate. Because South Korea is one of the most female-hostile employment markets going. You appear to want to go to Belgium. To the best of my knowledge, South Korean to Belgium immigration is not a big feature of life, but perhaps it should be. The UK is not in a great place here, and that displeases me immensely for so many reasons. For some period of my life, my wife was the higher earner than me. Somewhere there's a picture of me wearing a T-shirt that says, "This is what a feminist looks like." Unfortunately, it was XXL, this T-shirt, so you couldn't read the words. So what a feminist looked like turned out to be a very skinny man wearing a T-shirt that didn't fit. They never use the picture in their publicity. What we find then is that women are not as well paid for a whole host of reasons. But one of the reasons, this is the US, from the wonderful Our World in Data, when you have a proper job, donate money to Our World in Data, they're worth supporting, is it's not education. American women are better educated than American men. There's a whole host of reasons. They work in different occupations, they work in different industries, they have less experience. Some work I did on Swedish cigar firms 100 years ago found that was the dominant feature then. Women have less experience because they take time out of the labour market for caring responsibilities. One of the ways that we need, if we're serious about reducing this experience gap, and we should be, including men, because women are more skilled than men, so using women is good for the general standard of living, is to increase paternity leave and try to equalise the amount of childcare that men and women do so that both genders get an equal experience premium. Claudia Goldin, Nobel Prize winner, who's giving a seminar here very shortly, this week, I think, or next week. Yeah, this week, isn't it? Yeah, I'll be in the audience for that one.
Actually, next week.
Next week, there we are. Yeah. We're both economic historians. Claudia invited me to give a paper many years ago at Harvard, so I'm really very keen to see her. She's written an excellent book on women recently. I can't remember the title, you can Google it. So, the final one, even more exciting, population. I want to convince you that our problem is that we are running out of people. This is not the best starting point. You may have seen this graph before. This shows you the history of world population, and you can work out when industrialization happened, because if it hadn't happened then, everybody would have starved. And you can say, okay, Tim, you're just being silly with that graph. Here it is for the last 100 or so years, and again, it's still going up. So why are you telling me, Tim, that we're about to run out of people? Well, here's the prediction. Within your lifetime, the world population is going to start to go down. And I think it will do it before then, because in the last 40 years, we've always come in under the numbers that have been in the predictions. The demographic transition has been faster than expected. So here is a tale of two countries. One of them is Korea, and one of them is the Democratic Republic of Congo. These are the lines to date and the predictions. Here they are in numbers, in case you couldn't see them. What you can see is Congo is twice the size of Korea, but Korea is going to begin to slip and then slip really dramatically. So that by 2100, which most of you will see, there will be fewer than half the number of people in South Korea than there are now. And of course, the number of workers in South Korea will go down way before that. So what does this mean? Why is this a problem? Well, imagine you want to stabilize the number of retirees. This is the ratio of people aged 65 and up compared to people aged 21 to 64. So it's roughly retirees to workers. And you can see it goes up from 1 retired person for 5 up to 9 retired people for every 10 working. So roughly every worker is going to have to give up roughly 45% of their salary to look after an old person. That cannot happen. That's not going to work. So you say, well, can't we just put up the retirement age? Well, it turns out that if you put it up to 70, you delay it a bit, but you don't really change it. You have to put it up all the way to 80, and even that doesn't stabilize it. Now, who here aspires not to retire till they're 80? Show of hands, please. Right. Oh, one person. Well, maybe she's South Korean. I can't see you from here. That's not a comment on your ethnicity. If you are, you're living in the right country, because that is South Korea's future. No retirement till you're 80. Now, there are other consequences for Korea. First of all, when the population goes down, they're going to have more houses than people. Now, if you've done basic supply and demand, you'll know if people want fewer houses than there are houses, the price of houses will drop. It will, in fact, drop to approximately 0. Why would you want to pay more than £1,000 for a house? For sure, a better house will sell for some more. But house prices are going to collapse in Korea. At that point, the banks become insolvent because they've lent money on mortgages. On what? On collateral that's now worthless. The banks will go bust. They will have to be bailed out. Old people will literally have no one to care for them. This will certainly be true for rural old people, an issue that Japan is currently wrestling with. So what are the solutions? Well, there are only 2 possible solutions. One is immigration. But if Korea lets in enough immigrants to keep the population up, over half the people living in Korea will have been born abroad. No country has ever done that, except for countries that have been invaded in the days of empire when you basically exterminated the locals. Very few people speak Korean who don't live in Korea. Very few people want to learn it. Is the future of Korea really to let in so many immigrants from poorer countries that the Korean language dies out? I mean, that doesn't seem like a winning proposition to me. But otherwise, Korea needs to have a lot more children. Korea has the lowest total fertility rate in the world, 0.65. It's very, very low indeed. You need about 2.05 to 2.1 to keep your population stable. That isn't enough to stabilize the working age to retirement age. That's just to keep the population stable. What's true for Korea may be true for other countries. This is something I'm thinking about a great deal at the moment in the context of Britain. Countries throughout the West, and indeed in other places that are not the West, are falling. Here you've got some figures for, broadly speaking, the West. Korea is the top one, but they're all going down. None of these countries are above 2. South Korea, these are slightly older. It's gone down again since then. But, you know, Spain is on 1.28, the UK on 1.56. The United States, which for so long was comfortably above 2, now well below 2. At some point, you're going to want to put gates in your walls, or you're going to run out of people. What about the Democratic Republic of Congo? Could it cope with 400 million people? Well, it could. It's a pretty big place. I know it's not called Rwanda. But you'd have to chop down a lot of trees. Congo has a lot of equatorial rainforest. It's quite a wet place. If you chop down the trees, you're going to get a lot of swamp. You could have 400 million people there. It is definitely possible. But it wouldn't be easy, and it certainly wouldn't be easy for a country as poor as the DRC. And that makes me think at some point the DRC is going to go through the same change that, say, Tunisia has already gone through. Tunisia's total fertility rate is now down to 1.8, or Vietnam, or Malaysia, or Thailand. All of those countries already have rates below 2. So does Bangladesh. So many developing countries are going below 2 relatively rapidly, partly because parents see that the best future for their children is to have fewer of them and concentrate more resources in them. Maybe that's the story of some of you. I don't know how many of you are British, how many of you are international. But every year that I was here, I would teach international students whose parents had decided to have fewer children to save up the money to get those kids an education that they wouldn't be able to afford if they had more than one child. And very often they were successful. Of course, the ones I saw are a very biased sample of the success or otherwise of that strategy. So here is, as I say, the fertility rates for women around the world. And what you've got at the top are some countries that are still breeding in the way they have done for hundreds of years, that are, in a sense, pre-Malthusian. The Democratic Republic of Congo is one, Nigeria is another, but Nigeria is beginning to tend down. And then you look at places like Pakistan and Kenya, they are well into the demographic transition. And of course, they're doing it without China's one-child policy or whatever it is. If you can see Bangladesh in the middle, it's fourth from bottom at the end. Sure, it's above China, but Bangladesh is one of those countries that never had draconian policies, but the birth rate has come right the way down now to about 2. There's a famous country song by Loretta Lynn called Mama's Got the Pill, about the growth of female emancipation and contraception and not wanting to be tied 24/7 to looking after children and domesticity. And I suspect there are women in this audience today who do want more from life than that. And I celebrate your right and your freedom to want it. But, and I'm not saying this means you should change your mind, it is not for a middle-aged man to tell young women how to behave. Believe me, that is absolutely not my intention. But it creates an intellectual and practical challenges for all of us, male or female, if indeed those birth rates continue to come down, and that world population does not go up and over the top I showed you before, but in fact comes over the top much earlier and comes down much more steeply. And that's why I think that when you are my age, I might just be hanging on, one of you will give this lecture, and you will be talking about what we have learned about declining population, what it means for geopolitics, what it means for resource use, what it means for economies, and so on and so forth. And to me, that is the biggest currently unstudied challenge for your generation. It won't affect my generation. It will affect your generation. I have now been told to wrap up, please, which is perfect, because now is the time for questions.
Thank you, Tim. So we want people to raise their hands if they want to ask a question, and then we've got, as usual, our lovely stewards who deserve a big round of applause eventually as well.
There's a lady at the back I can see. I think we have steward in the singular.
We have yes.
He's going to get his steps in today. Right, we now need someone near the front to ask a question, then someone over there, let's get him moving.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, so you mentioned the declining birth rate will be a problem, but how do we address that? How do we fix it?
Sorry, how do we address it? I don't know. I don't know. This is going to be a really short answer because I don't know. There's a guy called Lyman Stone at an American university, I can't remember which one, who's been looking around the world. There's one country, it's one of the former stans, and it has something bonkers like a famous footballer who is absolutely wildly popular, and anybody who has 3 children gets him as the godfather to their 3rd child. And everybody is so desperate to meet him that it has increased the number of people having 3 children. And not only is he their godfather, they actually get to meet him. He has this, they have 4 a year or something in the biggest cathedral where they get to bring their children and meet him for this all-day dinner event. So it is just possible that footballers are the answer. But seriously, I don't know the answer. That's why I'm setting it as the challenge for your generation. So, there's someone in the middle. Aha. There's a guy in the middle, and then there's you want to run up and get them next?
Hello. I just want to ask one thing. So what is your response to this loop? The loop starts with difficulty creates man, man creates technology, technology creates weakness, and weakness creates difficulty. Thank you.
Oh, blimey. That's a bit philosophical to ask an economist. So I think that difficulty definitely creates ingenuity. And a good example of that is what's called Wright's law. If any of you have an FT log on, you can read Tim Harford. Tim's not a very common name, but I'm definitely not the most famous Tim in economics. Tim Harford beats me by a mile. And his column in today's FT looks at Wright's law, which is a learning by doing idea, that Moore's law is just wrong. The idea that things get cheaper every year, whatever you do, is obviously stupid. If we didn't produce any more chips, chips wouldn't get any cheaper. And what matters is doing stuff. When you do stuff, it becomes cheaper. And in the Second World War, the United States got serious about mass production of armaments because it had just entered a war after a period of being isolationist. And that need, that difficulty, we want to beat Japan and Germany, created technological opportunities that people seize. That's definitely true. The rest of it, I'm much less convinced by. I don't see any sense in which America became weaker because it solved the problems of mass production for armaments. I mean, and mass production more generally. They used that after the Second World War to mass produce all sorts of goods, including refrigerators, washing machines, etc. And as part of the Marshall Plan, they exported that technology to Europe. One of the reasons they wanted all those workers in Germany who'd had good jobs making armaments never to vote for fascism again. So what they did was they got them to produce washing machines and refrigerators and other such things to give them good jobs and keep them voting for democracy. I'm much more of an optimist than the person who wrote that. If it was your own words, they were rather clever, though.
Hi, so it's kind of a fairly well-established fact that the internet and social media and a lot of technology is causing an almost sound chamber effect of your own opinions, and it's causing more extremism in your beliefs. And an example of South Korea is that there's such a huge feminist movement, and it's causing a really large divide between the genders, and it's partially responsible for the low birth rate. So even though technology is something that you think is so good for society, do you think that it is also causing the problem of low birth rates and extreme opinions causing the breaks in society? How do you think that kind of balances out? Do you think that overall it still is way more positive, or if it actually might be part of the reason why we're having this possible population issue?
So I definitely think it's net positive. Most of you wouldn't be here. Right, if we go back 150 years ago, 3/4 of you would be dead by the age you are now. So the fact that all of you are alive seems to me to be a big win. I mean, I don't know you individually, but I'm willing to put money on the fact that your being alive is a good thing. And that came home to me 5, 6 years ago when a friend of mine was the first person in the world to survive cancer thanks to an experimental drug. She was pronounced terminal with 6 weeks to live. She was asked, would she, in her last 6 weeks, go on an experimental drug program, not because it had any chance of saving her life, but to better understand the side effects. And she said she would. She felt the doctors had done everything for her. And at the end of the day, somebody has to step up. And they said it could kill you within days. It could be so unbearable you want to die. You can opt out at any point. And she said, sure, give it to me. She was the first person in the world. And the only side effect is her hair was completely straight. It was even straighter than yours. It was as straight and flat as mine. It's now, in the words of her daughter, as curly as a sheep. Well, you know what? You can live with some side effects. So yeah, net positive for sure. Is social media in particular doing great damage, particularly, the evidence says, to teenage girls? Absolutely. The case against smartphones for kids, I think, is becoming stronger and stronger. There was a very good Norwegian paper that looked at individual schools in Norway. Some of them have banned smartphones, some haven't. They ban them at different times. It's a very powerful data set. It's showing big reductions in hospitalizations and other such things, overwhelmingly in girls, overwhelmingly in poorer kids. So are there bad side effects of tech? Of course. The Industrial Revolution gave us climate change. That was a pretty bad side effect. But am I glad it happened? Yes. I'm glad we're not still living in 1700. At my age, I would not almost certainly be dead, but there would be a more than 3/4 chance that I would be dead. So yeah, I'm absolutely in favor of tech. There's somebody behind you, and keep, yep.
Hello. So you mentioned, within your statistics as well, and you mentioned that women are more likely to be successful, because, especially in nowadays compared to before. But actually, we can see that in certain countries, men are taking the higher positions, perhaps of factors such as confidence and so on. So what would you recommend women to do so they could, empower themselves and reach to that level?
So my main advice is to talk to other women who have been successful. I mean, I'm very uncomfortable telling women what to do. I talk to my own daughter, she's now 21. We talk about her and her prospects and her career, etc. But it's much more important that she talks to her mother, who's also a professional, about her experience and how things have changed in the last 30 years. I also think the answer to that question is so country-specific. What's right in Britain won't necessarily be right in the United States, let alone in countries that are culturally radically different. So I have two requests of you. Firstly, that you talk to other people in your own country who are female and successful. And secondly, when you are my age, you lean in and you help those who are coming up behind you. Now, of course, they may not be women by then. It may be that we have, in inverted commas, solved women by the time you are my age. It may be people with disabilities. It may be an ethnic issue. But think, who are the people whose talents are being neglected? Who are the people who are not being appreciated? And you lean in and you help them in the context of your society when you're my age. This guy's got loads to do. If the other lady wants to come around to this. Oh, no, there's one on this side. He gets lucky. Sorry.
Hello, Tim. So I was wondering, when it comes to having an older population and the implied high dependency ratio, whether or not that is actually discounted by effectively a lower interest rate. I know you've written on the sort of pension triple lot. So I was interested to hear your thoughts surrounding effectively the secular stagnation literature in that sort of area.
So the answer is that it's funded pension schemes are a bit of a fraud, really. So let's say that my funded pension is because I own shares in Kellogg's. And let's say these two guys on the front row work for Kellogg's. Well, that's great, but I've just claimed part of their future. And if there's lots of us who own shares in Kellogg's, well, more of their future is now mortgaged to paying us when we're retired. And it doesn't really matter whether it's an unfunded pension scheme, in which case we get money out of all of you through taxes, or whether we get money out of you through dividends. One way or another, if I'm not working, you guys are producing for me. And there is no getting out of that. Funded, unfunded pension schemes, it doesn't matter. Ultimately, if you're not working, someone else is doing the work and you're taking their money. So yeah, I remain really concerned about that, really concerned. If you look at the demographics are changing now in South Korea so fast that I think South Korea, the first 1% a year in economic growth, roughly, over the next decade, will just go to the changing demographic ratio. So people will not see any rise in the standard of living unless growth is above 1%. That's a pretty big hurdle compared to the general hurdle of 0, when you think growth is only 2 or 2.5. Yeah, I'm worried. Oh, loads on this side. So if the other lady wants to come around, go on, you can pick anyone. See, I've empowered him to pick anyone. He's not used to it.
Thank you. I had a question regarding the population problem. So what would your thoughts be on the argument that a declining world population could be a good thing because on the demand side you have less people now, leading to less emissions that could help with climate change, and also more abundance of resource. So on the supply side, people have a greater standard of living. And the other issue you touched upon is a greater life expectancy is good. You're glad that all of us are here, but also that creates the problem of the dependency ratio. So is there even any possible solution that comes to mind right now?
So 40 years ago, I would have been in favor of a smaller population. 40 years ago, when I was, 37 years ago, when I was sort of 15, I was really worried about global warming. I couldn't see a good solution to this. I was definitely in the it's immoral to have children camp. But I think we are we are now far on the route to solving global warming. The resource curse I really don't think is an issue. Every environmentalist who's bet an economist on the future price of any good has lost. Anytime something goes up in value, we find a substitute. That's how economics works. So I'm much less worried than I was 30 years ago, which is why my worry has turned around. And yes, I think longevity is a great thing. I don't want to die. I mean, actually, I do wish to die about a week before I probably will die. Because in most countries, we now spend an inordinate amount of time and money increasing the level of pain for people on the cusp of death with almost inevitable sort of, oh no, we can try another intervention. And I think there is a great deal to be said for palliative care in the last week or so of your life. That's an issue Chris Whitty, our Chief Medical Officer, spoke about at the Nuffield Trust conference about a month ago. If you're interested in that agenda, if you Google Chris Whitty, Nuffield Trust 2024, his speech will come up and he talks about that. But so I want to die 1 week earlier than I probably will, but I want that week to be a long way away. I have a list of people I want to be like when I'm their age, and it's headed by my wife's great-uncle Fred, who was fit as a fiddle until he was 96, and a man called Rhys Lewis, who was one of my students' grandfather, who was LSE's oldest alum, and he lived to be over 100. He moved into an old folks' home when he was 100 to be on the safe side. That's what I want to be like, and he died with one ambition left. He wanted to be Britain's oldest man and well enough to be interviewed on the telly. And when he died, there were 2 people older than him, both of whom had very, very severe dementia. And he was really annoyed because one of them was a day older than him. And as he said, you know, that's a 50-50. But I would love to die at, I think he was 103, still with a serious ambition. That's my way to go. And he was well until the end. He had I mean, that's perfect. He had a heart attack and he went. So yeah, I want to live a long time. They're definitely all on this side. Oh no, you've got one on that side. Go on then, we'll keep going. Yeah, whichever, go on, you choose one. Come on, right, we'll have one on this side. There were loads of hands. Go on then. And we will have the man right at the back at some point, I promise you.
Hi, so I come from the perspective of someone who's 1, a woman.
Yep.
2, I'm Korean.
Oops.
3, my research is actually about maternal health care and how to increase access to quality maternal health care services for women.
Fantastic.
So something I was wondering, and I think is pretty well established, making and fostering a supportive environment for women to both be working and also be mothers doesn't only involve changing that stigma for women, but also among men. And it's a lot harder to change mindsets than it is to change policy. So my question is, what would your suggestion be for changing the cultural norms surrounding that stigma of being a working mother and also involving men to support the women in their lives that work?
So I work for a think tank called Onward, and one of my colleagues will, in about 10 days' time, come up with some answers for that. So I will give, with a request that you don't tweet this out, I will give you a flavour of what we think you're right, that it's very hard to change mindsets. But you can change practical things. So, for example, you could have a very large tax break for men and women who have children. Because at that point, that's non-transferable. At that point, you encourage both people to go out to work equally. That will almost certainly minimize your total tax bill if both people work. You can have paternity leave that is at a much higher rate of pay than the, I think, £172 a week you get in Britain for 2 weeks. I mean, you could literally have 6 months paternity leave, if you like, on full pay, or say on furlough conditions, which were 80% up to £2,500. Because at that point, there are a lot of men who, while they might quite like work, if you essentially offer them entirely free time off for 6 months, you know what, some of them will take it. So actually, I think sometimes you just need to create incentives so that those people who want to do the right things can do it, and not make money out of it, but be in a good position, so that it then becomes the norm. It's like smoking. How did we get rid of smoking? The most evil thing. I pray my mother died recently, and she died of smoking. It says on the death certificate she died of COPD, but she was killed by Philip Morris, the tobacco company, in their pursuit of profit. And I urge all of you, none of you have any idea what it's like to be an old smoker. It is impossible. That's why I'm delighted that we're going to ban smoking in Britain. Now, how do we start cutting smoking in Britain? We tax the hell out of it. How do they really cut down on tobacco smoking in Australia? They tax the hell out of it. So if you do the reverse, by inversely taxing the hell out of men who stay at home to look after children, then I think we can change culture. But I'm an economist. I've given you an economist answer. Those who are not economists, think into your own disciplines, think what other answers you would give, because mine might be rubbish, or it might not be the whole answer. Now, I definitely want the question for the guy at the back, because He's been waving his hand very patiently.
Hi, so it's a question which links both climate change and demographics, and it's on academics and researchers have said there's potentially mass migration due to climate change effects, and what do you think that effect will be on demographics and where, and so you were talking notably of like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and maybe what the effect will be there and just more generally?
So we know that most migration, legal and illegal, is short distance. So people migrate 100 miles, 200 miles, 300 miles. The number of migrants that any Western European country receives is relatively low, certainly the number of illegal migrants. So most of the migrations, if, for example, the Congo ended up with 400 people with which it could not cope, will be within 500 or 1,000 miles of Congo. So it will mean problems for neighbouring countries or opportunities for neighbouring countries, depending on how labour sourced they are and what sort of labour is coming over. In terms of disasters, it's very hard to predict, because just like everything, right, it's hard to predict what happens to general world patterns of weather when sea levels change, because we've never seen it before. So I have absolutely no idea which countries, partly because I haven't read the literature recently, but which countries are really going to be hit, apart from some obvious ones. You know, Vanuatu is in trouble because it's low-lying. But then the Netherlands is low-lying as well, and they've survived for a long time. So even the countries that you think, these are the slam-dunk big sufferers, the Netherlands have shown that it's not as easy to predict as that. So my main advice is to the organisers, is to ask Nick Sturm to give a lecture next year, because he could answer that question really well, and I can't. Sorry. I feel, you know, he's been trying to ask a question for ages, and I can't even give him a good answer. Right. Team, there are some people down here, over there. Just pick anyone.
We've got about 5 minutes, so maybe
Oh, right, we'll take them all. Yeah, take them all.
Try to be very concise. It's a test. Say it as concisely as possible.
Sure. Hi, my name's Amar. I'm one of the final year medical students at Bristol. I'll be entering the hospital, the NHS, as a junior doctor in the next year. What do you think the impact of a large proportion of young junior doctors leaving for countries like Australia and America and other places, and what do you think the economic impact will be on an aging population and so many young doctors leaving the country for good?
It'll be bad. I mean, yeah, there's nothing more to say to that one. It'll be bad, and please stay.
Sorry, I have two short questions regarding the gender wage gap. So the first is about in many developing countries like India or China, and I believe also for the South Korea, there is a problem called missing women. And this problem has been proved, like let's say for some women, they exist, but they are not in the official statistics.
Yep.
So this problem has been shown by many research organizations. They have showed maybe due to the lower income for women. So do you believe that because in your statistics there's no huge disparity for the developed and developing countries, do you believe that like gender wage gap is much more pronounced for developing countries for this problem? And sorry,
no,
another.
Just one question. We've got too many.
Oh, okay, yeah, sorry, yeah.
Go on, next one. Wave your hands, person who was near.
Hi, I'm Kshitij Gupta. Thanks a lot, Tim, for your talk. So basically my question was could we potentially integrate AI and demography issues, and perhaps there could be some innovations in AI with regards to that might solve that problem.
And the final one. Oh, final two. There we are, those two in the row.
If solar panels are part of the solution to net zero, how are we involving developing countries that have to deal with the negative impacts of production and disposal of solar panels in this transition?
This is a very complex question, but we know that essentially humans and the amount of humans is a determinant of technological advances. And research by Philippe Aguillon has also shown that the amount of people needed for the same amount of growth is massively increasing because we've picked all the low-hanging fruit. So as productivity of research is going down and population eventually going down, do you think that we're going to reach a stage where we're just not going to grow as a society because we don't have enough people to do the research and to innovate?
Okay, let me stop you there, because otherwise I'm going to forget the questions. In answers, yes, I'm very worried about unrecorded people. I can only work with the statistics I have. Mine is a global talk. Again, those of you doing research, go away and do research on how much of a problem that is, country by country. Can we use AI? I think the answer to that is we don't know yet. We really, really don't know what AI is going to do yet. The moral case for helping poorer countries is, I think, overwhelming. Not because of colonialism or anything like that, just because we're rich and they're not. And that means, you know, anybody who believes in the diminishing marginal returns for money should give a lot of money to charities that are effective in supporting developing countries, whether that's supporting the specific ways you set out or in any other ways. And that's why I'm a great fan of the Against Malaria Foundation, which is one of the highest ranked charities on GiveWell and the like. Finally, I am not at all worried about running out of growth, because every time we stand on the shoulders of giants, you stand on our shoulders, we stand on our previous generations. Those low-hanging fruit, yes, they've gone, but we stand taller than ever, and there are many, many more fruit above us. It is, after all, only 110 years since the Wright brothers managed to fly a length that is shorter than the wingspan of a modern aeroplane. We really haven't run out of things we can do. In medicine, in tech, no matter what it is, your futures are bright. Work hard, seize them, and enjoy. Thank you.